An Indonesian volcano has again erupted over the weekend, covering nearby villages with ash and rock. Mount Ruang started erupting last Tuesday, creating a spectacular sight at night, with lightning bursting from the eruption column. Volcanic lighting happens when particles of volcanic ash collide, and then they generate static electricity. Ray Cas is a volcanologist and emeritus professor at Monash University, and he is with us now. Ray, really good to have you on. It's quite the sight to see, isn't it, when you see that night sky lit up in that way?
It's been a very spectacular eruption with multiple eruption phenomena, these great columns of ash rising above the vent, fountaining magma or lava from the vent, lava flows. It's had just about everything.
Yeah. What are the unique factors around this volcano and the eruptions that we're seeing?
It's a particular type of volcano that we call a stratovolcano, and it's a conical volcano like Mount Fuji. So it has very steep sides, and that, of course, has enhanced the possibilities of perhaps a major landslide going into the sea around the island, which could trigger a tsunami. But stratovolcanoes are notoriously inconsistent and unpredictable in their behaviour. So we've seen an eruption starting last week, Tuesday, and it's been intermittent, on and off, over the last week. But that follows a history where there were 8 eruptions in the 19th century, 4 eruptions in the 20th century, and this century already, there was one in 2002, and now this phase. So very unpredictable.
So, and that must make it very difficult for authorities to actually manage and plan for something like this.
Absolutely right. So the current eruption was preceded by an intense period of about 5 days of seismic activity, which gave them some indication that an eruption would be forthcoming. But once this type of intermittent eruption starts, you're absolutely right. It makes it very difficult to predict what the next phase of the eruption might herald and what style of eruptive activity might happen and what the associated hazards and risks might be with those changing eruption styles.
Yeah. So a lot of people were evacuated. To your point that there was some concern there may have been a tsunami. Has that danger passed now? I understand the tsunami warning has been removed at this point.
Yes, I wouldn't be too confident that it's totally disappeared, because there is still, even though the intensity of the eruptions has decreased, there was a quite low intensity one on Saturday afternoon, but there is still ongoing seismic activity of a particular type that we call volcanic earthquakes. And what they indicate is that molten rock is rising through the Earth's crust underneath the volcano. So it certainly isn't over yet.
Interesting. So then how do authorities determine when it's safe for people to come back home?
Yeah, they have to be patient, because they have to take into account all the factors, including seismicity, the intensity of eruptions, the frequency of eruptions, and they really have to wait until all of those indicators subside before they can be confident that people would be safe to return to the island.
Ray, you know, this is, I presume, one of the volcanoes that is watched and closely monitored. To your point, there's been quite a lot of activity. How are these sort of, volcanoes that we're seeing, quite a few of them around the world, are they connected in any way?
Yeah, so Ruang is part of the Indonesian volcanic island arc, which contains over 120 volcanoes that are pretty well classed as being active. And they connect indirectly with the Pacific Ring of Fire, which, as we all know, is a well-known belt of both volcanoes and major earthquakes, where the Earth's tectonic plates, that are mostly oceanic, subside back into the Earth's interior around the margins of the Pacific along the deep ocean trenches. So the Indonesian arc is just off that line in the Indian Ocean, but nonetheless, the mechanisms and the origins of that volcanic and earthquake activity are exactly the same as in the Pacific Ring of Fire.
Yeah, fascinating. You know, what you're seeing and what you described earlier, spewing out of this volcano, does it have environmental problems down the track for crops and vegetation?
Yes, so the plumes of volcanic ash which have been rising above the volcano, those columns of ash have varied from less than 1 kilometre in height to, on Saturday, one that went well over 10 kilometres.
Wow.
So the ash, the higher the column, the more widely the ash is dispersed. But it's also complicated by the fact that there are different wind directions at different altitudes in the atmosphere. So instead of just the ash being dispersed in one direction at the top of the eruption column, apparently this ash was being dispersed in multiple directions by wind directions at different levels. So yes, the ash obviously falls on land masses, but also in the oceans, and it can certainly impact crops. It can certainly, and it will impact any water supplies, any uncovered water supplies. And of course, there are health hazards associated with both the fine ash and also some of the volcanic gases, particularly the sulfurous gases that are released and then dispersed around the volcano in the directions of communities on the neighbouring islands and also even south to Sulawesi.
Yeah, and imagine that
where
yes, continue.
Where for the last few days the main airport has been closed.
Yeah, and I imagine those...
because of the ash problem.
Yeah, and that would, I imagine, persist for some while. You're not going to get rid of that in a hurry.
No, the fine ash will remain suspended for a while, but it will get dispersed by wind as soon as the intensity of the explosive eruptions begin to subside.
Yeah. Ray, really interesting. It's so fascinating what you do, and I'm sure you're watching this one very closely. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure, babe. Bye.